So it's such a pleasure to meet you, Jay.
Thank you.
And I have read your story, and it's very inspiring, and it's quite a story too, right? And I know that you have been able to reach many people because of what you have gone through. And more importantly, it's not what we go through, it's what we do with what
Yeah,
we went through, right?
absolutely.
And you made purpose out of pain. So welcome to God Size Stories.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to hear. I like your background, Billy Graham, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a lot of course, you can't see my hallway, but down our hallway, we've got Billy Graham stuff all up and down the hallway. I actually named my youngest son Graham after Billy Graham. So,
So that's
yeah.
awesome. So I read in your story that you have traveled with some evangelists. Was he one of them?
Actually, I have a picture on my bookshelf I'm looking at right now. I had the privilege of sitting on the stage with him at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. And so I've done a little bit of stuff with the Graham organization over the years. It's been a while, but I've done some different things. And so, yeah, obviously he's a role model for many people and certainly has been for me as well. And getting to meet him and sit on the platform with him was a pretty big deal for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Billy Graham too. He was an inspiration. My big hero of faith has been Dr. Charles Stanley. He was my pastor for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So I know you probably know him very
Of
well in his
course.
ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's a
Yes.
legend of the faith for sure. No doubt about it.
So much gratitude when you have people like that pour into your life and teach you so much. So
Well, I see a lot of times when I'm on the road preaching, I'll still see, even though he'll be on TV on Sunday mornings. A lot of it's
mhm,
older stuff, of course.
yes.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, my husband watches him every Sunday still, even though he's in heaven now. But
yeah,
yeah, it's a pleasure to listen to him and to still learn from him. So it's
yeah.
wonderful.
He's
Let's.
one of those guys that he'll be on TV for years and years to come.
Mhm.
He's really not a preacher. He's more of a teacher, but incredible teacher.
He really is. He really is. And that's kind of like my style of writing too, or my style of when I speak. I'm more of a teacher as well,
Yeah,
so I can relate a lot. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, Jay, you have an incredible testimony, and I would love for you to share with my audience exactly how you came to the Lord and how this has changed your life.
Well, like a lot of people, I live in Texas, so I grew up in the South. And for people that are not well traveled, some folks don't understand, especially people from the South, that everybody didn't grow up this way.
Mm.
But for us, church was literally a way of life. I mean, everyone went to church. You went Sunday, you went Sunday night, you went Wednesday, and a lot of people went for alternative reasons. Not everybody that went to church or even now goes to church because they love Jesus. They go because it's a good place to meet people. It's a good place to build business. It's a good place to find a date. There's a lot of different reasons. And it wasn't that we were going because of any ulterior motives, just what you did here in Texas. I will say my mother and father were both believers. And so their relationship with the Lord was real. But church was still something more. I think spirituality was looked more as something that you do on Sunday, where you go and you sit down and you listen to someone teach, and then you go about your life Monday through Saturday. I didn't really know many people that church had any real impact in their life throughout the rest of the week. It was just something that you did on Sunday. But with that backdrop, when I was a young person, I walked an aisle and I was baptized and joined a church and grew up like a lot of young kids in the South. You know, you went to youth group, you went to summer camp. These are just things that you did. And so, because of that, like a lot of people to this day, I believed that I was a Christian. I don't know that I could have identified what a Christian was, but I believed that I was a Christian because, again, I went to church. My mother taught Sunday school, but there was no relationship. And it was a very, very empty thing. And so therefore, when I graduated high school and went off to college, I did what many young people are doing to this day. I walked away from church. There was no need in going anymore. There wasn't a purpose to go. It had no significance in my life. And prior to that, I had already began to experiment with a lot of things that young people experiment. I did not live, I didn't live a Christian life. I'll just say that. And so by the time I got off to college and then got the free reign that comes with being 3.5 hours away from home and no one looking over your shoulder, my life really started spiraling out of control. So after one semester at college, I ended up moving back to my hometown of Wichita Falls, where I currently live, and moved in with an old friend of mine from high school. And was really disoriented at that point, didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know if I was going to go back to college. I was just oscillating back and forth with my life. But I grew up in a home where my father was a successful businessman. So I kind of had that backdrop of I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to do something. I just didn't know what. But moving back home, and I didn't enroll in college immediately. And getting back with an old friend of mine led to, I guess you could say, a car crash in my life. Not a literal car crash, but an emotional in every way. And so anyway, really everything culminated within the next 3 years. I was forging government documents. I had an addiction issue in my life. I didn't have a job, of course. I had lost my car. I'd lost my job. I'd lost my girlfriend. And those are very pivotal things for someone who's 21 years of age. And and I also had a lot of mental health issues at that time. There was a lot of depression in my life. And again, a lot of it was situational. A lot of it was due to the fact that I had an addiction issue. It was tied to some catastrophic events that had happened in my life that I didn't know what to do with. And so when you have an addiction issue and you're living without a car, without a job, without a purpose, without a meaning, without significance, without a mission, and struggling with a lot of depression, I began to have thoughts of ending my life. Those thoughts that a lot of people have had of, what's there to live for? And is there a purpose? And I began to isolate myself from, part of it was embarrassment of my addiction. Part of it was where I was in life. A lot of my friends were in college, and a lot of my friends were dating people, and I really had just kind of become a nobody.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I thought about ending my life for quite some time, and initially started out thinking about shooting myself. This sounds so silly, but I initially thought about shooting myself in the leg and pretending that it was an accident. And that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but the theory behind that was nobody really knows how much I'm struggling mentally and emotionally. And this way I could pass it off as an accident, but it would be a way where people would know I was hurting, because nobody really knew. I mean,
It was a call for help.
Yeah, really, it is what it was. It was a call for help. It was wanting somebody to know how this Grand Canyon that I'm in. I was too proud to tell anybody, but I thought so anyway, that was the initial thought. And then over time it progressed to me making the decision that I was going to end my life. And so one day I woke up about around noon and walked in the bathroom to splash some water on my face to try to kind of sober up a little bit. And I don't know what was different about that day than any other, because that was a routine for me. But when I splashed water on my face and looked in the mirror, and we were living in this old dumpy duplex. I mean, it was just, I didn't even have a bed. I slept on a sofa. I mean, it was a dive. But somehow, I don't know what it was about that day, but when I looked in the mirror it was like the mask was gone. And I saw, I don't know, just the realization of where I am in life, who I have become. And I hated myself. I hated the reflection that looked back at me. And so I put my fist in the mirror and shattered the mirror and went back to the sofa, which was my bed, and pulled out a gun and just decided I just wanted to escape the pain. It's not that I really wanted to die.
Right.
I just wanted to stop the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I pulled out the gun, and I had not thought about spiritual things. Spiritual things were not on my mind ever. But I started wondering, when I do this, just based on going to church my whole life, will I go to heaven or will I go to hell? And then, of course, the next thought is there even a heaven or is there a hell? Is there even a God? I mean, I've been taught to believe all this, but God's never really had any influence in my life. But it was a big enough concern that as I sat on that sofa with a pistol, I was kind of, the pendulum was swinging back and forth of trying to ascertain if God was real, if heaven was real, would I go to heaven? And it was kind of looking back over my life. And I came to the conclusion that many people have, that since I went to church and since I'd walked an aisle and since I had been baptized, that if God was real, I'm good to go.
You were in.
Yeah, I'm in, which I wouldn't have been in, but there was a level of deception there. I didn't know that. And so when I came to the conclusion that if God were real and if heaven were real, since I had gone to church, et cetera, that I'd go to heaven, then that was good enough to end my life. And again, this had been going on for months, thinking about this and trying to grasp for hope and whatever. And so anyway, I pulled out the gun. I always kept one underneath the sofa. We lived in a pretty rough part of town. It's all we could afford. And sitting there on the sofa, cocked back the hammer, putting my finger on the trigger. And I mean, literally had pressure on the trigger. And I heard somebody pull up on the gravel driveway, which nobody pulled up on our side of the driveway. We lived in a duplex, but I mean, nobody would be there that time of the day because everybody we knew was either at college, at work. And my roommate worked for his father, and he couldn't come home for lunch because he only had a 30-minute lunch break, and we lived too far away from where he worked to come home and eat and then go back to work. And so it just caught me off guard of, who would be coming, why is someone at our home? Because no one would be there. And so I set the gun on the sofa, walked over to the blinds and peeked out the blinds. And when I did, it was my roommate's car. And I was so startled. I went and put the gun down underneath the sofa and turned on the television. I didn't want him to know what was going on. And my roommate walked in and I said, "What are you doing home?" And he said, "Man, it's the craziest thing." He said, my dad walked up to me and said, "I want you to take the rest of the day off. I'm going to pay you for a full day." I knew his father. And if he were on a Zoom call today, he would tell you his father, in all the years he worked for his father never even let him off work early, let alone half a day with pay.
Wow.
So when that happened, I began to question if this was a coincidence or was it possible that it was God trying to spare my life. I didn't know the answer to that, but I began to question it.
Wow. That's incredible. You recognized that something was definitely not normal, right? Of what happened, although you didn't realize it was God right then.
Right.
Well, I know that by your story, you end up back in church, right? Seeking God again. And you get saved about 6 months later?
Yeah, several months later, there was a guy that came to our town and he had attempted suicide. And that's the only reason why I went to hear him. And snuck in to hear his story, but he didn't share his story. He shared the gospel. And when he shared the gospel, he got to the end of it and he said, some of you, you've been in church your whole life. You've been baptized. You can quote John 3:16, et cetera, but you don't know God. You know about God.
Mm.
One day you're going to wake up and eternity lost singing Amazing Grace. And when he said it, I'm like, that's me. I don't know God. I know about God. I don't have a relationship with God. And at that moment, for the first time, I realized I may be somewhat religious, but I'm lost. I may profess Christ, but I don't possess Christ. And at that moment, there's nothing I wanted more than. Of course, I was broken enough by then that no one had to convince me I was a sinner. No one had to convince me my
Really.
life was in disarray. I knew all that,
Mm.
and I knew that everything else, that every other mountain I tried to climb, had never brought satisfaction. And so that night, I invited Christ in my life.
Yeah, your story is very similar to mine, or actually, my story is very similar to yours. I was a little older than you were because you were 21, right, when this happened.
Right.
I was 25 too. At the end of myself, an agnostic at the time, had been raised as a Catholic girl, going to Catholic schools, and I found myself having losing everything. Same situation as you said. Mine was a lot was I had a boyfriend of 4.5 years that cheated on me with one of my best friends, and my business was failing, and then I started having panic attacks that I couldn't control, just just to find yourself. I feel like, and you probably can relate to that. It's like God allows you to be the master of your life, or you think you are the one who controls everything. And then, when you find out when life happens, you find out you're not. And that's when a lot of people look up and find Jesus. And aren't we thankful that we did, right?
Yeah,
That
no doubt
it's,
about it.
yes, yes. And
Well,
then
and
you,
so I'm
go
sorry.
ahead,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, with your experience, then fairly soon after that, God calls you into ministry, right?
Yeah, I mean, I came to Christ on a Sunday night, and 3 nights later, they had a student event in the local Coliseum, and I went. And I mean, no one in my family's ever been in ministry, so that was never on plans. I wanted to be a businessman like my father. But 3 days later, when I went to the student event, I saw several hundred students give their lives to Christ. I had no idea what ministry was or anything else,
Mm.
but I knew one thing. I wanted to help other people come to know the Lord that had just come in my life. And when I saw those students go forward to receive Christ, I turned to my roommate and I said, that's what I'll do with the rest of my life. I didn't say go into ministry because, again, I had no concept of ministry or anything.
Right.
I just knew that I had just found the Lord. And even though I've only known the Lord 3 days,
Mm.
I'm a new man. And I want to somehow, I don't know, it's like I always thought I wanted to make a lot of money because, my dad was a businessman. But once I met the Lord, all I wanted to do was help other people meet the God that I had just met 3 days before. And seeing those kids give their lives to Christ was like, what could I do that could be greater than that? What could I do with my life that would mean more than helping other people like me, other people who have the despair and the brokenness that I have? And so my roommate thought I was crazy. He's like, he gave me this look like, you're going to do what? I'm like, I'm going to do that. I want to use my life to help other people come to know the Lord. He was like, okay, yeah, whatever. But eventually, I got invited to share my testimony, and one thing led to the other. And now 20 plus years later, I've been all over the world sharing the gospel, doing that very thing.
Yeah, you prophesied over your life and didn't even know it.
And didn't even know it. Didn't
Didn't
even
even
know.
know it. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, Jay, we're in, and we're going to publish this because of the subject of this podcast during the month of September. We're gonna fit it in because of how important it is. It's Suicide Prevention Month.
That's
September
right.
is right. So,
Right.
I think this conversation is very important, especially today, right, where we have never seen the numbers of suicide attempts or suicidal thoughts, as we have seen in the youth. I have interviewed Dr. Barna, George Barna, and different people who are really researching about this generations, the millennial generation, Gen X, and what is driving them, what the issues that they are facing. And it sounds like it's not just, not only for the younger people, but even men. The only time that suicidal rates were higher in our modern history was during World War II.
Yeah.
And so it is an incredible time. So I would love for you to share what your ministry does today. I know that you are a speaker at events, but what are some of the things that people who are listening right now, and they may be facing the same thoughts that you and I have faced one time, or they may have a child or grandchild that you are afraid that they may be very depressed to the point of suicide. What are some of the resources, some of the things that you have to offer them?
Well, let me first of all say a couple of things. Number one, they can always go to my website. I've written countless articles. I've spoken about this all over the world, both nationally and internationally. And so there's a lot of resources over the years that our organization has provided, that my ministry has provided. And again, that could be in written form, that could be in spoken form. Another thing I want to say before I'm getting to your question is the fact that there is some degree of misconception that suicidal thoughts only happen among non-believers. And that's not true. There are
Not true at
people who
all.
have mental health issues and people who fight depression who love Jesus as much as anybody else.
Mhm.
And while I know there's a certain contingency of believers that go, well, if you prayed enough or if you believed enough, that's not correct.
That is not
I
correct.
mentioned before we got started today, I have COVID. I don't think that just because I know Jesus that I'm immune to COVID. I believe
Right.
the Lord can heal me of COVID instantaneously. And I know the Lord sometimes does heal people of suicidal tendencies and suicidal thoughts. But having depression or mental health issues is not for unbelievers, non-believers alone. It can happen to everybody. And so I think that's very, very important because I think there is an element of people who know Christ who are afraid to talk about it or share it because they think that others will look down on them, that their faith is not strong enough. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
So true.
So you mentioned that there may be folks that are listening to the podcast to this, or there may be people who have a friend or a spouse or a loved one or a grandchild or whatever the case may be. And of course, you couldn't wrap up everything to do in just a short segment, but there are a few things that I would recommend. Of course, the spiritual context can never be alleviated. Of course, praying for people, um, but but there's more to it than just that. Um, Again, I would. There are numerous suicide hotlines where if somebody doesn't want to speak to someone that they know, there's 1-800 numbers that they can call that are available. I would encourage people to find a therapist or a counselor. Some mental health issues can be alleviated just through the use of medication. And again, I think there are some people that are reticent and think, well, I'm just going to wait till God heals me when God has provided professionals.
That's
Um,
right.
Without getting too deep in the story, after my wife had our second child, my wife never had depression. And her and I don't really understand a woman's anatomy, but her serotonin level got off. Long story short, my wife started having some serious mental health issues and had to get on some antidepressants. Had never been
Right.
depressed in her life.
Hmm.
So I simply say that because there are some remedies that can take place just from medication. So there is nothing wrong with going to a counselor. There's nothing wrong with going to a doctor. The next thing that I would say, outside of course, you want to pray for people, you want to love on people, you want to be understanding. There's nothing wrong with getting professional help. But I would say, first and foremost, if you know someone who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, maybe they've even made comments that the world would be better off without me. I don't know if I can go on. My life is no longer worth living, which really are cries for help. Sometimes people say, well, they're just trying to get attention. That's exactly right. They're trying to get attention because they're hurting. But one of the most important things that a person can do is to make themselves accessible. The number one deterrent to suicidal tendencies has been proven that it has been to have someone to talk to. And someone might say, well, Jay, I wouldn't know what to say. But it's not having all the answers. It's making yourself accessible. It's letting someone know, I've been concerned about you. Maybe they won't open up, but just letting them know that they're cared for, that you are accessible, that you can call me day or night, that I'm willing to come see you, that I'll take a phone call in the middle of the night. There's been this fallacy that talking about suicide can lead to suicide. And all of the experts will tell you that it's the number one deterrent, having someone to talk to. So again, it's hard to encapsulate.
Right,
There's so many
absolutely.
things, but just some of the key things that I think need to be mentioned today is the unashamed perspective to get help, to be open to talk with others. Again, whether it's therapy, whether it's medication, to make yourself available to other people that you have concerns about, that you think may be struggling, or maybe have even given some of the telltale signs of someone who's in danger, are very, very important things to do.
This subject is dear to my heart for many reasons. Someone who I love very, very much was suicidal, somebody close to me, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah,
And come to find out later, thank God, she didn't take her life, but she was suicidal. And I know from my own experience, I was suicidal, nobody knew it.
yeah,
So it is a very lonely, most of the time, the people,
yes, it is.
because there is there is a shame part,
That's
there's a
right.
shame side of it. And then in the Christian church, you nailed a very important aspect. Unfortunately, Christians are so afraid of judgment
That's
with
exactly right.
any weakness. Let's just be honest. Any weakness, whether it is, they're having a struggle with an addiction, or they are depressed or anxious or suicidal, or they're having a marital issue
That's right.
that's serious and they need help. It's incredible. We should be the people who are more open to getting to sharing our pain with others, asking for help, asking for prayers, but we're not.
Yeah.
And so, with that in mind, and since we're talking about suicide, tell with your experience and your research, what are some of the signs that people can be looking for?
Well, like you, I had someone who was very close to me commit suicide. He asked to meet with me, and we met at a restaurant. I knew he was having marriage problems, and you would think if anybody would have recognized someone who was suicidal, it would have been me.
Yeah.
And again, I knew he had issues. I had no idea he was at the place where he was. A wife, 3 children, went and hung himself from a shower head. His children found him absolutely horrible. So I only say that to say that even those of us who feel as though we have a pretty good understanding, have even spoken about and taught about suicidal tendencies, can be caught off guard. But there are sometimes some different signs. Um, and we see this of all ages. One of them would be a sudden tragedy. It could be it could be a car accident. It could be a diagnosis. It could be the loss of a loved one that sends someone over the edge. It could even be a situation where someone loses a job.
Mhm.
These traumatic life events, and I'm not saying that everybody obviously that has one of
Of
those
course,
becomes
yes.
suicidal, but that can be one of the triggers. Another one that a sign that is often evident is someone who is now beginning to abuse substances, alcohol or drugs. It could even be prescription medications. Someone who normally did not partake at that level, who you now see abusing in a way that they previously had not. One of the things, another sign that we've seen among the teenage culture is people giving away things. Um, Another one is isolation. Matter of fact, I mentioned that with me. The deeper I fell into depression, the more I isolated myself.
Mhm.
And people gave me space, not recognizing that I didn't need space. but it was my way because of the shame and because of the embarrassment. So, again, I don't know that there's a complete comprehensive list, but these are some of those things. We've talked this whole podcast about mental health issues. Someone, again, not everybody who has mental health issues is suicidal, but somebody who is now on a downward spiral emotionally, spiritually, that hasn't been. They're just things that, in essence, are out of the norm, things that are out of character for someone, things that normally take place at a more drastic level than what you would expect from someone. These are things that should cause us to take notice and to get involved. And again, when we talk about getting involved, the beginning step of that is accessibility. And when I say accessibility, I don't mean accessibility when it's convenient. I'm talking about accessibility that you understand that I'm here for you day or night. That means if you need to call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll pick up the phone and I'll take up your call.
Yeah, I love that. And the other thing that's so important is that we need to be more proactive in the way that we reach out to people who are hurting. And I don't think that, unfortunately, it's a sad thing, but our lives are so crazy, so busy. And I have made, like, in the past, especially in the past couple of years, I have made a deliberate point in reaching out to friends who I know are struggling with X, Y, or Z. People who are, like I said, I've had a friend whose husband had a heart attack and has all kinds of issues, has had several health issues on account of that. I have a friend who's going through cancer, or somebody who lost a loved one. And we, as believers, we know that God has the power to change the paradigm of this person's life and to give them a perspective of faith and hope.
Yeah.
And yet, it seems like we respond to their cry on that first moment, and then we forget.
Yeah.
And so this has been such a change for I'm a very busy person like everybody else, but the God puts somebody in my head, in my mind. Sometimes they are in my prayer list. I will every couple of weeks at least send them a text. I don't have to necessarily call them,
Yeah.
but I can text them and tell them, hey, how are you doing? I'm thinking about you. I was reading this and I thought about you, and just send them like a Bible verse. And I'm praying for you right now. I love you. It's just like, how long does it take?
Yeah.
Right? And you
Exactly.
do not know. You're telling me of this, and I just had something happen to me on account of this one small thing that I do. Was one day that I was praying for several friends, and one of them she has terminal cancer, right? So I sent several of them a text after praying for them, just encouraging them, and she was one of them. And she texted me back and said, Patricia, you have no idea. She said, what this did to me today. And she said, I was feeling hopeless, I was feeling alone, I was feeling like bogged down, right? And it took me, maybe after my prayer time, it may have taken like 10 minutes for me to just reach out to some friends with specific message for them. So I'm just saying to say, not only we have to open our eyes for suicidal thoughts, but if we know somebody's struggling, be proactive, right?
Right. No doubt about it. Yeah.
In your love for them, not just in prayer, but be the hands and feet of Jesus. Maybe send them a card, maybe make them a meal. It's so important.
Yeah. That just goes back to following those prompts that God gives you. And like you
Mhm.
said, with modern technology, it doesn't take much to send a word of encouragement. It doesn't have to be a lengthy phone call. It doesn't even have to be a go and visit. And I've, like you, I've seen that same thing happen so many times. There's a guy that I knew from Austin, and the Lord kept putting him on my mind. And anyway, I was like, oh, I'm going to call him today, or I'm going to text him today, or I'm going to email him today. And it's just life. It wasn't that I just forgot. I got busy. The phone would ring at work. One of the staff members would come in. Long story short, this went on for about 3 weeks. And I woke up one morning and I'm like, if I don't do anything else today, I'm going to reach out to him. And so I called him and I told him, man, I've been wanting to get in touch with you for several weeks, but the phone rang and the staff member came in. He said, Jay, you weren't supposed to call me then. It was today. And I said, why? He said, my wife just left me today. So you're right. It's following those prompts. And sometimes those things where the Lord lays on your heart somebody that you think it's just something random, it may be God's very way of trying to reach someone who could be potentially in a very dangerous situation.
Absolutely. You have to be always, the longer you walk with the Lord, the more you understand it because you are attentive to his voice. A lot of times, I mean, he puts the most random people in my,
Right.
my mind sometimes. I'm sure you can, people way back from the past that I don't even have a contact anymore, and you pray for them,
Yeah.
it's important to do. Well, um, Jay, tell me this. I know that you have the transformative power of faith is evident in your life, in your own testimony. While what the devil designed for evil, God had planned for good. And now you have this ministry that reaches campus kids as well, right? You have a ministry in campus. Tell me, how do you approach these kids when they are not, or the people that you minister to, when they are not necessarily believers? How do you approach?
That's the great thing for me is our ministry really is focused. I mean, I'm a full-time evangelist. That's all I've ever done. So I've spent my entire life traveling itinerantly. So when people call our ministry, they're not calling. I mean, I say that. I mean, I speak to plenty of believers for sure. And I've been speaking to churches for 20 plus years. But the primary thing that people are bringing us in for is while we do speak to believers, they're wanting us to reach out to the lost community. So it's an evangelistic effort focused on reaching the unsaved. And so the great thing that is the power of the gospel. Yes, we try to use innovative things. We put on different types of events, student events, men's events, women events, college events. We do a lot of different things to be innovative to get unsaved people under the sound of the gospel. You know what the word says. Faith comes by hearing the word. And so in order to get, in order to share the gospel with unsaved people, you have to have unsaved people there. And so we do try to be innovative and not replicate what anybody else is doing. And we've been very effective at that. At the same time, the great news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a broken world. People are hurting. People are struggling. And there are people all over the world, let alone even the South, that even though they've been to church, have never even heard a clear presentation of the gospel. And I don't have to be innovative in the message. I may have to be innovative in the technique of getting people there. But the power of the cross in and of itself is enough.
It's enough.
I mean, that's not just preacher talk. That's not just, oh, well, that sounds good for a podcast. To be quite honest with you, the first time I traveled overseas, I thought, does this really work outside of the United States? I mean, I know it works in the United States, but it works everywhere because the message of the cross, the power of the cross, when the story of the cross is preached with anointing and accompanied by the presence of God's Holy Spirit, it's not just a story. It's not even just a message. It's literally life. It literally injects purpose and reason and forgiveness. And so it does what nothing else can do. That's the power of the gospel. And so obviously I try to speak to people on their level. When I speak to men, I speak about men's things. When we do our women's events, I speak about women's things. When I speak to students, I don't talk to students the way I talk to adults. Of course, we have to be strategic in our approach. But when you boil it all down, it's a message about a man hanging on a tree between heaven and earth, being slaughtered for the sins of mankind, not just so they could go to heaven, not just so that they could have this rain and gold-filled streets, but so that God Almighty could live inside of them and give them a purpose and a hope and a reason and a life. And because of the brokenness of this world, people are looking for life.
They are.
And
It's the missing piece of
absolutely,
everyone's puzzle.
absolutely,
And you said something that is so true. People forget that we don't do this on our own. We have the Holy Spirit
right,
within us. And when you go preach the gospel to whoever, and you go in the anointing of the God who sends you, you don't go alone. The power is
right.
not yours. The work is his. You are a vessel. You are his mouthpiece, and he uses all the willing vessels,
That's
you know,
exactly right.
and I love that. Well, I I love your heart and your ministry because I can relate a lot to the things you were saying, your experience, your walk, and also your passion for evangelism. I love that. And I know that you have a book that is Midnight in Aisle 7.
Yeah,
It says sometimes God introduces himself outside the church walls.
yeah.
So tell us about this book, just so that people know. And your PR agency said you're giving one of them to someone in my audience. So please tell us a little bit about this and how it can help people, evangelize.
Yeah, well, I've written two books. One of them is a devotional, and then one of them is Midnight in Aisle 7. And Midnight in Aisle 7 really is very similar to what you do in your podcast. I mean, your podcast, God-sized stories. And in essence, that's what the entire book is. The book is people from all walks of life that have literally been to hell and back, from sexual abuse to physical abuse to addiction to suicide. The list goes on and on. And people who have found God outside the church walls, miraculous encounters. That's why when you turn on the television, I've never been on a weight loss system, but I know that all these weight loss commercials that I see, there's a common denominator. And it's always showing the face of somebody who says, this happened to me and I overcame it. There's something about the power of a story where people can identify, and they hear this man or this woman who lost 100 pounds or whatever. It's a testimonial where it gives people believability that can happen to me. Just like your podcast, the book is very similar to that. That no matter what you've been through, no matter how bad that it's been, there are other people that have been where you've been that can identify, that have found the hope in a living, resurrected Son of God named Jesus Christ.
Amen. Amen. I love that. That's right. That's the missing piece. And
Yeah.
when you find it, there is no better life, right? Even through it all, through everything, we are more than conquerors because He is ours.
Yeah. And, people watching this, hey, let me make something clear. I love Jesus, and the God radically changed my life. And the greatest day in my life was the day that I met the Lord, hands down. But that doesn't mean that I don't have problems.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't mean that I don't have issues. I've had marriage struggles. I have had to go through therapy. I have had to go through counseling. I am a man who struggles with sin like anybody else. So I met Jesus and I love the Lord, and he's my life. But that doesn't mean that I don't have problems, and it doesn't mean that I don't have issues, and it doesn't mean that every day is great, and every day I wake up just thrilled for the. It's not that.
No,
There's been a lack of authenticity in the church for so
that's
long,
right. That's right.
and I don't want to be that guy. So
That's
yeah,
right.
the Lord changed my life, and yes, I love the Lord, and yes, He saved me, and yes, I know I'm going to heaven, but I still have problems. I still have
Right.
struggles.
Well, I love this, and you're so right. It's about time. I think that people want to see the Christian leaders who, yes, they are faithful to God, but it doesn't mean that they fall. The difference is they don't stay on the floor; they get up and
Yeah,
keep
exactly.
moving, and that's part falling is part of being alive.
Well, it's been ironic that the Christian community has worked so hard to conceal any struggle and any weakness when the entire Bible is filled with people who had struggles and weaknesses and failings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It is. It is. People. if you think that we are this super Christians just because we write a book and because we have a ministry and because God, no,
No,
and
sir.
I love that you say that, because it's very important. People do not realize how much they, you know, they are just like us, the people who are struggling. We either have been there and God has delivered us, and that's why we tell the story, or it doesn't mean that we're never going to fall again when you follow the Lord. So I love that. Very good. Well, dear Jay, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time with me, and I appreciate it. I appreciate this great ministry. I'm going to leave all of the information for people to connect with you in your show notes. Jay is a wonderful speaker for events, especially with youth events, with the young people having so many issues with depression and anxiety and suicide. I think it's such a great thing to be able for you to go and speak and minister to these people. But also, one of his books is going to be given to someone in my audience, so don't forget to fill out that form in the show notes for a chance to win a copy of Jay Lowder's book. Is it Lowder? Did I say it right, or Lowder?
You said it right. Yeah. You said
Yay!
it right.
It is not uncommon that I go to Google and say, how do I pronounce this name?
Well, it's been mispronounced many different ways, but yeah, it's Louder, which I guess is appropriate since I'm the preacher.
There you go. It is. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. God bless you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.